We're on section number 155, Departure to the Mount of Olives, and there are like one verse from each of the Gospels there to look at and two questions, but some interesting considerations that come out of this tonight. And then also we should be able to do section 156, the instruction to meet in Galilee after the resurrection, and Peter's second protest. So section 155, we'll read Luke 22:39 and Matthew 26:30. Luke 22:39 says, "And he came out and went, as he was wont, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him." And then Matthew 26:30, when they had sung a hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. So the question we have here is this first question is number 896. What did Jesus and the disciples do before proceeding to the Mount of Olives? And the answer we got was A, they sang a hymn. They sang a hymn. Okay, well, when you look at B and C together, they had a good cry, or they complained to God that it wasn't fair. Okay, well, they neither focused on mourning, which would not be entirely inappropriate, nor did they turn inwardly with a victimization mentality. They didn't complain that it wasn't fair. And this is actually something that was also a possibility, was something that would be really a very real kind of possibility, because we are prone to a victimization mentality, because how do you say it? Not conscientious? The conscientious Christian let me write that down. The conscientious Christian reaction is to deliberately not think of themselves with a victimization mentality. Okay, and I emphasize, I'm saying that very specifically, that it is a deliberate, intentional thing to not do it. It's not enough to just go through life and say, and sort of have an attitude, catch as catch can, whatever. You just try to maintain some kind of sense of serenity. We have to be deliberately and intentional in not being self-centered. We have to say, not just, I'm not unflapped. Nobody's flappable. I'm not flapping, whatever it is. I'm not bothered. We don't just say, I'm not bothered by the situation. I'm cool. No, you have to deliberately say, I am deliberately not going to let this bother me. Okay, because if we're not deliberate about it, we are more naturally prone to feeling like the victim and to feeling like, oh, poor me, which then brings focus back on ourselves. So a conscientious Christian not only goes through life with a certain sense of cool about them, they're deliberate about it. They're conscientious about it. And like I say, it would not have been inappropriate for them to have a good cry and to have some mourning over it. Of course, they were still really, somehow in all of this, always remember throughout this whole process, up until the resurrection, they are generally not getting it anyhow. So that might account for why they're not having a mourning there. However, look at A. They sang a hymn. They sang a hymn. This is a kind of a common thing that happens in a lot of services when you have the Lord's Supper. We just don't have the habit of it, but if ever you've been in another church, you might have ever noticed that at the end of communion, they will sing a hymn to close out the service. That's where it comes from, is from this time here, when they had the Lord's Supper, they sang a hymn and then they went out. Very often, a hymn that's sung is, "Blessed be the tie that binds." Okay, so singing a hymn for a feast like this was common to do. It was not just because they were having supper or they felt like singing a hymn, but it was a kind of a common thing to do to close out a feast. The practice of worship and praise that singing provides should be cultivated, and it will serve its purposes for times just such as this. In other words, if we are in the habit of singing in hymns, to responding to things with hymns, and sing specifically hymns, when the hard times come, those hymns come back to serve us. They're our old friends that come back to us. They become our servants to help us through the times. We should respond to trying times with singing God's praises, not as a reaction to counteract the time we face, but as a matter of second nature, because we are in the habit of praising God. It's easier to attain the attitude of praise if we are regularly engaged in doing so than if we're forced to focus and muster it up on the spot. Consider what Paul did when he was in the Philippian jail, right? When you look at Acts 16, verses 23 to 25, that's Acts 16, verses 23 to 25, we read, "When they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely, who, having received such a charge, thrust them into the inner prison and made their feet fast in the stocks. And at midnight Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard them." That's kind of interesting. Can you imagine you've just gotten beaten, bloody, and you're sitting there and somebody says, "Oh man, what should we do?" Can you imagine somebody saying, "Hey, let's have a song," right? That's not your normal reaction. I know, let's have a little song fest here. Let's have a sing along. You usually do that around a campfire, right? Not when you've just been beaten. But you see, that is the natural reaction for somebody who's in the habit of doing that, who's in the habit of praising God. We are commanded to do this. Colossians 3, verses 15 and 16, Colossians 3, 15 and 16, says, "And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also you are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord." I find it interesting. There are some Protestant denominations out there that do not believe in singing hymns the way we would. And they say, well, we're supposed to sing in psalms, and they will use the psalms. Have you ever heard of a psalter? Okay, psalter is where they have the psalms that are put in a little bit, they're altered a little bit to be able to fit a tune and to be able to be sung. And there are those that think that you can't have any musical instruments out there. But I say, well, okay, hymns. And they might say, well, yeah, get them from the Bible. What about spiritual songs? Okay, we should sing and have that creative worship come out of us. We do it when we preach and when we teach. If somebody said, well, okay, well, you're not a very biblical preacher, well, if all you could say was just what was from the Bible, then that was the only thing allowed, because you don't want to have anything coming from man, what he has to offer. Well, then we'd only be able to read the Bible to each other. No, but this creative worship is something that is very appropriate to come out from us. This is also one of the reasons that hymns are so powerful. Well, people thoughtlessly assume that because they are older, that they're tired, and that when the opposite is actually true. So they're not just old, tired things to do because they're old. Hymns are our old and trusted friends. By virtue of the fact that they are tried and true, we will remember them more in the time of need. Now, perhaps some songs written more recently will be added on as they have a chance to age and mature, but don't throw out the old. Instead, let the new All right, you let the new ones, I'm going to correct this. I don't want to say, I say new age here. No, let the new ones, the new hymns, age and also become the old. A word of caution about modern creations, though, is that if they are popular in spite of the lack of musicality, then you have to wonder about the heart attitude of why people are so devoted to them. In other words, there's stuff that's out there that's just really not very musical. Yet people, they just want to adopt them only because they're modern. Well, what's the heart attitude that's involved there? And so the hymns become our old friends. And in fact, I always point out about a time like this, and so if you might be aware of it already. But when you have on television or some show, whenever they want to be able to have a religious moment, one of the things I say, when they quote the Bible, what do they quote? King James Version, because it sounds like the Bible. And what do they play when they want to have some kind of, when they want to indicate that it's a spiritual moment, that it's a hymn of some kind? What do they always play?
Amazing Grace.
Always
Amazing
Amazing
Grace.
Grace. Yeah. It's amazing. It's always Amazing Grace. But there are those things that are about those hymns, because we sing them over time. They are our old friends. How many people have ever visited Hobby Lobby? Okay. As you've been in there, is there anything that you've noticed in Hobby Lobby as you're walking around? They're
Christian
playing
music.
hymns. Yeah. Listen to the background music. This music in the store. It's all hymns. It's amazing. So hymns are those things, and they are ingrained in us, and that's the way they should be. Okay, hymns are not meant to be entertainment. People sometimes ask me what kind of music I listen to. They assume I just listen to hymns. I don't listen to hymns for entertainment. I listen to hymns for spirituality. For entertainment, I typically am going to listen to classical music. Okay, I got to be careful because music gets stuck in my head, and so it just plagues me all through the day. But hymns are there for those spiritual moments. Okay, somebody back there. Did I see Joe? Brother Joe, yeah.
Years ago, I went to, it was some kind of eye doctor. I don't remember what purpose was, but he was playing, or I don't know if it was him, but his office was playing family radio, which at that time, at least, there were a lot of things you could say about family radio, good and bad, but generally speaking, their music was quite good.
Yeah.
They were pretty on target with their songs. So I was like, oh wow, this is I could tell from the songs that were playing. I was like, that sounds like family radio, and it was.
Yeah. There you go.
So I always appreciate it. I told them that. I said, I appreciate the music that you're playing.
Yeah. Okay. A question 897. When Jesus wanted a place for reflection and prayer, where did he usually go? And we pick this up in Luke 22:39. And he came out and went, as he was wont, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. So where did they usually go? A, to the Mount of Olives, where the Garden of Gethsemane was. Okay, when you look at B, to the Jerusalem and the temple, which was so pure. Yet no, Jerusalem and the temple should have been a place where one could go to be comforted in reflection and prayer, but it was not so pure at this time. This is how David described it in Psalm 84. Psalm 84 is a little bit short, so follow along here as we think about this. It's 12 verses long. David says, how amiable are thy tabernacles. Amiable, friendly. Amiable means friendly. How friendly are thy tabernacles? Okay, the temple should be a friendly place. Okay, it was tabernacle because there was no temple yet when David wrote this, of course. He says, my soul longeth, yea, even fainteth for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Yea, the sparrow hath found an house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young, even thine altars. He's kind of jealous of the birds. Have you ever been in a mall and birds fly by? I always think that's so totally cool that they somehow got themselves in there, can't get out, and they have their nests up there. Yeah, he's kind of jealous. They can get into the altar. You can't go into the place where the altar was if you weren't the high priest. He says, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God, blessed are they that dwell in thy house. They will be still praising thee. Selah. Blessed is the, and I think of how when we go to different conferences, how just such a blessing is. You just don't want to leave, and just you walk away, you just feel so filled up with joy over those kind of things. He says, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee, and whose heart are the ways of them, who passing through the valley of Baca make it a well, the rain also filleth the pools. Baca means tears. So passing through the valley of tears, in other words, you cry so much when you're in the valley of tears, you're going through those times that you fill it up and you're creating pools of water from your tears. They go from strength to strength, every one of them in Zion that appeareth before God. O Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer, give ear, O God of Jacob. Behold, O God, our shield, and look upon the face of thine anointed, for a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. For the Lord God is a sun and a shield. He's a sun because he exposes our sin, and he's a shield who shields us from his judgment. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will be withheld from them that walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man that trusteth in thee. You see, that's what Jerusalem and the temple should have been. That's how David felt about it. We look at C, to Galilee, where he liked to go fishing. Well, Galilee might have been attractive, not because of any fishing, unless it was the fishing for men that went on there. The idea that it was for fishing suggests the idea of physical leisure, which would be the opposite of what could be expected in a spiritual setting. So A, the idea of going to the Mount of Olives in the garden being a place where he was wont to go, should make us realize that we need places where we regularly go because we can be more more intimately meet God there. I think it was very interesting that Brother Tyrone's sister was saying that he came home from church that first Sunday. She saw him and he was just aglow, and he said, I found a church finally that he'd like to be in. Isn't that a nice testimony? Everybody made him feel so welcome. She was so impressed. Somebody came up and gave him a King James Bible, she said, and it was so touched and that this was a loving place, and he had the nice time to be able to come here for fellowship after that too. Okay. That's the way church should be. We should have this be a familiar place, and serving God should be a familiar thing that we resort to all the time. And that's in addition to really any private place. You might have a special place where you like to go for prayer or something like that. That also should be something to consider as well. Okay, question 898, moving on to section 156. Yes, Brother Tone, yes, please.
Before we leave these two questions, I just thought that you made this on purpose because Jesus once told the Samaritan woman that there will come a time that worship will no longer be either in Jerusalem or in the northern kingdom's place, but he said the worship will be in truth and in spirit, and therefore, because here you arrange it as A, B, C. B and C are the worldly context that should require the disciples to win the faithful for Christ, because it became worldly. Jesus criticized the temple as these people having transformed it into a den of thieves instead of the way you describe it by David in Psalms. And the Galilee thing, because just as you said, yes, indeed, it's fishing, but not for no long. Jesus converted the disciples from being fishers of fish to fishers of men.
Yeah, and I think also you would have suspected Jerusalem because I guess because people have this sense of forms that they've got to follow. People's natural religious and superstitious sense is to have something that becomes the ritual, And so, no, he did the opposite. He was going for the spiritual moment, worshiping in spirit and in truth, which made the Mount of Olives really the more fitting place too.
And the event that just preceded this was the Passover in what's this place? The house of Mark's mother, the upper section. That's where they had their Passover. Is that right, Pastor?
It doesn't name, as far as I can tell, where it was at. I'd have to look at that. Maybe that was from some reading. I don't know.
I'm confusing it from the way that he instructed to his disciples to pick up a colt.
He did, but
they were so that they can arrange the meeting in the upper room.
But for sure it was in an upper room. It was not in a temple. It was
really that's right, Pastor. That's why I'm saying that. To choose a spot where they can regularly meet. And feel more the presence of God with them.
Amen.
Well, God, here they had God, Jesus Christ, God Himself.
Yeah, that also probably speaks to the aspect of how that yes, we have our organized worship and our organized service to God, but you have also personal. So what we do personally, we do in an organized way in church. Some people only want the organized, and they don't have the personal time. Then you get the other people who want personal, but they don't want the organized. Now you got to have them both together. Okay, let's go on to section 156. The instruction to meet in Galilee after the resurrection and Peter's second protest. So, question 898, who did Jesus insist was going to forsake him? Matthew 26:31 says, Then saith Jesus unto them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. And so the answer is C, all the disciples. Now, somebody without a lot of Bible knowledge might have guessed, Peter because he was denying him, or Judas because Judas certainly denied him. And those are your two major popularly understood people who forsook Christ. But really, and although Jesus was fussing at Peter about this, he was not alone in the fussing. Okay, he just caught the heat, but everybody was going to forsake him. So Peter and Judas, probably so often the subject of denying or betraying Christ, that somebody could lose sight of the fact that all the disciples were going to forsake him. This was necessarily so because it was prophesied, and necessary because Jesus would go to the cross completely and utterly forsaken. We should get the message that without Christ empowering us, we are statistically just as likely to fail Christ. Statistically, because 100% of those who were trained were still proved to be human, not just all those in Israel who would be shouting to crucify him shortly. So it's not just the ones shouting. 100% of all people are going to be there, and there's going to be failure. Okay. So before I call him Brother Tone, if ever you go to feel bad because you failed Christ, don't worry, you're in bad company. you're in similar company with all the disciples who failed Christ. Brother Tone, yeah.
I answered C because I connected the Zacharias quotation with verse 35 of Matthew 26, where it says, likewise also said all the disciples, and also Mark 14, verse 31. Like it said, I will not, because they claim that they will not deny Jesus, but they all did. So likewise also said they all.
Yes. I'm going to put down verse 35 to add on into my notes here. Okay, question 899. Where did Jesus say that he would meet the disciples after the resurrection? And this is based on Matthew 26:32. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. And so the answer is B, in Galilee. Okay. Not the upper room, not in Jerusalem. Now, Jesus did indeed meet with the disciples in all these places, but evidently during the 40 days before Pentecost, Jesus met with them in Galilee. Perhaps it was there that he was seen of more than 500 brethren, as is recorded in 1 Corinthians 15:6. Okay, question 900. How certain was it that Peter was going to deny Christ? And this is based on Mark 14:30. And Jesus saith unto him, Verily I say unto thee, that this day, even in this night, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And the answer is, okay, A, not another day was going to pass. The cock crow or dawn would not come twice before he would deny Christ. When you look at B and C, it was not so sure because now Peter was more aware of the coming temptation. No, it was a sure thing. With the backing of all the disciples, he and they would die first before denying him. Well, you would think that with greater warning that Peter would begin to get a clue. Sometimes it's hard to conceive of the possibility that there would be any way we could change our hearts and minds. So before judging Peter or the disciples, we should be aware that we don't know 100% for certain how we would react until we are actually faced with a particular trial. So A, in this second account of Peter's protest, Mark records the extra words of Christ that there would not be a second day pass before he would deny Christ. And this emphasis serves to point out that there was no delay possible. Okay, and we see this also on, let me see. I have a note here. Let me see if it's accurate. Oh, I can't tell. Okay, maybe I can tell. Okay, I have to correct a note in here. But we had this other discussion also already. I am going to. I think I'll point that out the next time as well. Okay. Generally speaking, what it is that the reference to the cock crow twice. If you remember, I shared this on another occasion, how that there's different references. It could be referring to the actual crowing of the rooster, or it could be referring to a time of day. And the context should give us a clue as to which it probably is at that time. And that's certainly the case here. It's that Christ is saying, you're not going to get another morning. Before you're going to only have one morning, and we're not going to have to wait another day for this to happen. It's going to be so quick. He's describing how certain it is.